The purses were still there. That was the detail that stopped the first officer cold when he walked through the front door. Not the silence, not the emptiness, not even the broken porch light that had been the first thing anyone noticed from the outside. It was the purses, sitting exactly where women put purses when they come home and intend to pick them up again. On the counter, on the chair, on the table by the door. In the places that say I live here and I am coming back. The cars were still in the driveway. 3 women, 3 cars, 3 purses. Every personal belonging left exactly where it had been placed by hands that fully expected to return to them. And not one of those 3 women anywhere on the property, not in the house, not in the yard, not answering when their names were called into the June air. They were simply gone. And the only thing in that entire house that suggested anything had been disturbed at all was a single broken porch light. In June of 1992, 3 women vanished from a house, and the world they left behind was so completely intact that for a long time nobody could agree on what that meant. Because disappearances come into varieties, and investigators understand the difference immediately. There are disappearances that leave wreckage, overturned furniture, broken glass, blood, the physical evidence of a person who fought against what was happening to them with everything they had. And then there are disappearances like this one. Clean, complete, surgical in their thoroughness. The kind that require either the willing cooperation of the people who vanished or the absolute control of whoever took them. There was no sign of a struggle. That phrase, in the language of missing persons investigation, is not reassuring. It is not evidence that nothing bad happened. It is evidence that whatever happened was controlled, was planned, was executed by someone who understood that a struggle leaves traces and had either prevented one or eliminated every sign of it. The broken porch light was the single crack in an otherwise seamless surface. One broken bulb, one small violence against the ordinary. Everything else untouched, everything else waiting. To understand what was lost that June, you have to know who was there before the losing. 3 women, 3 lives. 3 separate collections of history and habit and personality that had converged in that house the way women's lives converge through friendship, through need, through the particular bond that forms between people who choose each other as their daily witnesses. They had routines, the way all people have routines. Morning coffee in particular mugs, specific chairs that became theirs through repetition rather than assignment. Inside jokes that had long since lost their original context but retained their warmth. The accumulated texture of shared living that makes a house into something more than walls and furniture. They had people who loved them, mothers who knew their daughters' voices on the phone before they said a word, friends who expected them at specific places at specific times, colleagues who noticed when Monday morning arrived without them, people whose days had shapes built around the assumption that these 3 women would continue to exist in them. When June of 1992 ended those routines without warning or explanation, the people who loved those 3 women entered a particular category of grief that has no clean name. Not mourning, because mourning requires a body, requires confirmation, requires the brutal but necessary closure of knowing. This was something else, something that sits between hope and devastation and refuses to fully become either. The grief of not knowing is its own specific weight, and it does not get lighter with time. It gets more complex, it grows chambers and corridors. It becomes a place people live inside rather than a feeling they move through. The investigation began with the purses and the cars and the broken light and expanded outward from there with the methodical urgency of a case that felt wrong in every direction. Interviews were conducted, friends, family, neighbors, anyone who had seen the women in the days before they vanished. Anyone who might have noticed something on the street, a vehicle that didn't belong, a person lingering where they had no reason to linger. Anyone who knew of conflict, of trouble, of the kind of threat that precedes this kind of disappearance. Theories accumulated the way theories do in cases with no body and no scene and no forensic anchor to attach them to. Some people believed the women had left voluntarily, that something had happened, a decision, a crisis. A shared reason to disappear that had driven them to walk away from their lives simultaneously and completely. It was the theory that required the least darkness. The one that allowed the people who loved them to imagine them somewhere alive and choosing their absence rather than having it chosen for them. Most investigators did not find that theory persuasive. The purses were still there. Women who choose to leave take their purses, they take their cars, they take the objects that carry their identity and their money and the practical infrastructure of a life being continued somewhere else. They do not leave everything behind on a Tuesday in June and vanish into air. Something had come to that house. Something that arrived after the porch light broke and before anyone noticed the women were gone. Something that had taken 3 people without leaving a mark on anything except that single shattered bulb. The years passed the way years pass in unresolved cases, not quickly, not cleanly, but with the grinding forward momentum of time that does not pause for unanswered questions. The families of the 3 women lived inside those unanswered questions every single day, while the rest of the world moved on with the casual ease of people who are not missing anyone. Investigators pursued leads that dissolved, followed threads that went nowhere, revisited the evidence looking for the angle they had missed, the detail that would suddenly make the whole picture legible. There were searches, there were tips, there were the periodic resurgences of attention that unsolved cases attract when the anniversary arrives or a new investigator takes interest or someone somewhere claims to know something. Most of those claims led nowhere, and then, in 1997, 5 years after 3 women walked out of a June evening and did not come back, a man named Robert Craig Cox said something that changed the shape of the case permanently. Robert Craig Cox was not an unfamiliar name to law enforcement. He was a convicted kidnapper, a convicted robber, a man whose relationship with other people's freedom and safety had already been adjudicated by courts and resulted in prison time. He was the kind of person whose name, when it surfaces in connection with a missing persons case, produces a very specific reaction in investigators, not surprise, but the grim recognition of a pattern completing itself. In 1997, Cox claimed that he knew the 3 women had been murdered. He did not claim innocence. He did not claim he had heard something secondhand or pieced together from rumor. He stated with the flat confidence of someone speaking from direct knowledge that the women were dead and that their bodies would never be recovered. Never, not as a guess, not as a probability, as a certainty. The kind of certainty that only belongs to people who were there, who made decisions, who chose locations and methods and the particular geography of concealment with enough deliberateness that they could stand 5 years later and guarantee the outcome. He did not confess, he did not provide details. He did not give investigators the location of remains or the sequence of events or the names of anyone else involved. He simply stated what he knew and then stopped talking, with the practiced composure of someone who understood exactly how much he could say without crossing the line into legal consequence. It was a confession without being a confession, an admission without being an admission. It was the most calculated kind of cruelty, telling the families of 3 missing women that their daughters and sisters and friends were dead and buried somewhere unreachable, and then refusing to say where. Here is where the story twists in a direction that makes the stomach drop, because Robert Craig Cox did not make this statement in secret. He did not whisper it to someone who then passed it along. He said it publicly, with the awareness of a man who had calculated his exposure and decided he was safe. And he was right. Without a body, without physical evidence directly connecting Cox to the disappearances, without a confession that contained actionable detail, law enforcement could not charge him, could not arrest him, could not move the case from unsolved to prosecuted on the basis of a statement that was simultaneously everything and nothing. He knew the women were dead. He knew their bodies would never be recovered. He said so out loud, and he walked away. That is not a plot twist from a screenplay. That is a real man and a real year standing in front of real investigators and real cameras and telling 3 families that everything they feared was true. and then using the absence of their loved ones' remains as a shield against the consequences of what he knew. The broken porch light suddenly made a different kind of sense. Someone had broken it deliberately, someone had wanted the darkness, had needed the approach to that house to be unseen, had understood that what they were about to do required the cover that a functioning light would have denied them. It was not vandalism, it was preparation. It was the first step in a plan that had been thought through far enough in advance to include the specific problem of visibility. 3 women were inside that house when the light broke. They were alive. They had purses and cars and routines and people who loved them. And whatever happened in the darkness that followed was so complete and so controlled that it left no physical trace except the broken glass of a single bulb. The families have never stopped looking. That is the detail that belongs at the center of this story, not at the edges. Because the true horror of what happened to those 3 women is not only what was done to them, it is what has been done to the people who loved them every single day for over 30 years. 30 years of June anniversaries. 30 years of hoping that a phone call or a news report or a construction crew breaking ground somewhere will finally answer the question that Robert Craig Cox answered, partially in 1997, and has refused to complete ever since. 30 years of a grief that cannot fully become grief because grief requires an ending, and this case has never ended, it has only continued. The mothers who waited by phones that did not ring with the right call have in some cases gone to their own graves without receiving the answer they deserved. The friends who expected those 3 women at specific places on specific mornings have built entire adult lives around an absence that was never explained. The investigators who worked the case have retired and passed it to younger colleagues who were children when it happened, and those younger colleagues have picked up the same threads and followed them to the same dissolving ends. Robert Craig Cox knows where those women are. He has always known. He knew in June of 1992 when he left that house with its intact purses and its still cars and its single broken light. He knew in 1997 when he stood in front of cameras and said what he said with the calm of a man who understood that knowledge without evidence is its own kind of immunity. He knows now, wherever he is, whatever he is doing, the location of 3 women who had routines and coffee mugs and people whose days were shaped around their continued existence. He has chosen every single day for over 30 years not to say. There is a particular kind of evil that does not announce itself dramatically. It does not arrive with thunder. It does not look the way movies have trained us to expect evil to look. It arrives on a June evening and breaks a porch light and does what it came to do in the darkness and leaves everything else exactly as it found it. It is methodical. It is controlled. It is patient enough to wait 5 years before saying anything and then say just enough to cause maximum pain while maintaining maximum protection. That is the evil that took 3 women from a house in June of 1992. Not the explosive, uncontrolled violence of rage or impulse, but the cold, deliberate violence of someone who planned, who prepared, who broke the light before they began and made sure there was nothing left behind that could be used against them. Someone who understood the law well enough to use its requirements against the families of the people he had destroyed. The purses are gone now, evidence in a case that has never closed. The cars have long since been processed and released. The house has had other occupants who had no idea what the walls around them had witnessed. The broken porch light was replaced by someone who did not know what its breaking had covered. But 3 women are still missing, and 1 man still knows where they are. In the architecture of unsolved cases, there is a category that investigators call functionally closed. Cases where the principal suspect is known, where the evidence points clearly in a single direction, where everyone in the room understands what happened and who is responsible, but where the specific legal requirements for prosecution cannot be met because the most essential evidence, a body, a confession, a witness, does not exist or cannot be obtained. This case lives in that category. It is not unsolved in the sense of being mysterious. Robert Craig Cox removed the mystery in 1997 with the casual cruelty of a man who knew he was protected. It is unsolved in the legal sense, the sense that matters for prosecution, for sentencing, for the formal acknowledgement by a court of law that 3 women were murdered and that the person responsible has been held accountable, that accounting has not happened. 3 families have waited 30 years for it. Some of them are still waiting. Some of them have stopped being able to wait in the active sense and have simply learned to carry the waiting as a permanent condition. The way you carry a chronic pain that will not be treated, that has become so integrated into daily life that you can no longer clearly remember what it felt like before it arrived. Somewhere, in ground that Robert Craig Cox has never identified, 3 women are buried. They went into that ground in June of 1992 with their whole lives behind them and everything that should have been ahead of them, taken away by someone who broke a porch light and moved through darkness and left no trace. They had morning routines, they had specific mugs, they had people whose days had shapes built around them. They had purses on counters and cars in driveways and the full living weight of 3 human beings who expected to wake up the next morning and continue. They did not get to continue. And the man who ended their continuation has spent over 30 years breathing free air and watching the families of his victims search the ground that he alone knows how to read. The porch light has been replaced. The purses are gone. The cars have been moved. The house has been lived in by people who did not know what it witnessed. But 3 women are still in the ground somewhere, and 1 man still knows exactly where. He has chosen silence for over 30 years. He has chosen it deliberately, strategically, with the full understanding of what that silence costs the people who loved those 3 women. Some silences are not passive. They are not the absence of speech. They are a weapon, wielded every single day, against people who have done nothing except love someone who did not come home from a June evening in 1992. The porch light broke, the darkness came, and 3 women walked into it and never walked back out. The only person who can end this has decided not to, and that decision, repeated every morning for 30 years, is its own kind of murder.